Alright, 당좀 쇼게 타르토비에기 람냠레기 림바 디마 지게 슈바리 디 베딩은 저기다 마로 시작지 디니 마를 좀 베라자 제가 당주 자오디 지다는 거지 자원에 대한 저기 난기 녀몽바 대한 거 정원에 디레서 올당하죠 제가 디가르스는 거 녀몽바디게 게디는 거 강아 지금 말도 수실이 녀몽바기 기우서야지 매래다 녀몽바게 같은 강아지야지 동안 용어 쳐서 녀몽바디 지거로 와 제가 녀몽바디 자원에 대해서 제가 녀몽바 자원에 진짜다 녀몽바를 되셔 공로 가자 지금 말이 발라서 봐 자오 망고 녀몽 망고 예배 나네 다디 다선 말이 바디 자오 조디지 다 디기 다 마음을 마서는 중화되게 되셔 공로 근데 나야되게 봐지 어두스는 자오디지 네가 어여서 나한테 셈나려 진짜 나한테 자원에 대한 아주 섬나로 샤지네 어파기 딩을 ningali 녀도 딩이 자오 이 미디닝을 녀고서 디르바지 지게 지고다 제가 디기 자오디기 파랑체네 마한솔 자오 안 섬나로 자오디기 파랑체네 파셔들 자오레서 미션다 지는 녀 기제 내 강아지 지고로 진짜 자원에 대한 아주 셈나로 요 녀모바디게 해제 다들 자오들이야 지말마서는 그 좀이야 매버서야 되라 다 마기 막본로지 나즈마 제발라 마미치 거로와 다들 파쇼들 좀이야들 천차시 거로와 천차시 거로와 다 마음에 당 천차니 여바 점이 마디 야고 지투고 막 그래서 델레 상유어치 해지 거로와 상도 어디 그때 상화하고 한지 거로와 되네 다한 어디 숨고 거로와 어디 나시 당한 저기 다 녀몽바 자오 녀몽바데 매버 쇠라 마음이 아주 잼바디시 다고 상완나 상완 상유지 핸디 시신디시 시신디기 근데 상유지 당은 저기 천자를 마서나 다디레 추림다 잼바서버 전에 삼대 디나데다 대사 두진 천자세데 베지 천자 시우지 디기 유샤번나다 강아 휴수고 시고로 어디나시 다 동바 다음에 봐도 베셔 동바이 또 베셔랍디다 다 디나시레 다 다음에 봐도 베 동유도 베셔라 또 깨라 깨선 디 녀모 바자원 매워서셔고로 와다 제가 디 제가 디네자다 마음이디 전시 전바디체 제가 다 하고 건 심주지가 상황로지 지겐디 시신이지 제가 시신 디기 안 주길라 녀모 가르치기도 시도 되샤 benedigo control 기업은 제 전부 시신디가 하고 시신다 하고 control 기도 선배 하고 요도 남사 전부디고 오다 시신 그때 control 기구는 될 년보다 잠재고면다 잠재고면서 제가 잠재고면도 control 마시죠 오다 되니게 당연히 되샤 기여도 아 되샤고 되샤 년보다야 내가 년보 가서 미도 보고 미야라 되니게 직망고로와 어두스네 고미야라서 봐 되니 다 디나시다 두시네다 녀몽기 치사는 요에 규초디다 다른 마릭바들이 하고 있는데 니파 점에 될래다 천샬을 마선다 최쇼디 같은 다음에 봐도 셰럽디체 제자디 잼비 대제 다음에 봐도 셰럽디 봐 곰제 디체도 된 된제 다른 마릭바들 싸워보네 제가 방어레스 디 방어도 되는 지금 제가 디 코알리티베 타르바세도 두고래 세상에 다들이 쇼게 디고 쉬거라 왔다 타르바 토비하게 탑람 냠술레 나리고.
Good evening. This morning then we completed looking at the stages of training to engage in order to achieve liberation from cyclic existence, liberation from all the sufferings of samsara. And in my presentation, I used the analogy of warfare, whereby we recognize that when engaged in warfare as a warrior, one has, excuse the pronunciation if I get it a bit wrong, but as a soldier maybe, recognize that one has an enemy. And this is an enemy that one needs to eradicate. And as mentioned in terms of the meaning of the analogy, here a key point to come to recognize, which takes some time, but it's of indispensable importance, is to recognize that for us as practitioners, we have one enemy, and that's our afflictions. That is our sole enemy. This we really need to recognize, not just the procedure that the various afflictions, such as anger, attachment, jealousy, and pride, all come from the ignorance of self-grasping as its root cause. This we need to recognize. But we need to recognize that we do not have a single external enemy, external to our mind, so not our body, not our various situations that we encounter, or other people. Not a single one can harm us. What harms us are our afflictions. We'll express this slightly differently. What harms us is how we respond, how we react to things. This is a key point to recognize, because when one does, you'll see how ridiculous it is to get angry at anyone else, to criticize anyone else, or to criticize or complain about a particular situation or event. It's all unimportant. It's our response to these things that causes us our suffering. Therefore, we need to recognize that our sole enemy lies within these afflictions. So then to return to the analogy of warfare. When one is engaged in war, one necessarily has an enemy, otherwise one is just, moving from here to there. So one requires an enemy, one requires soldiers, one requires weapons, and one also requires spies. Probably would normally call military intelligence, but here we'll use the term spies. Those who in secret operate to understand what the actual situation is. So in terms of using this analogy for a practitioner, the soldiers that one utilizes, as in a platoon of soldiers, these we can liken to the consciousness of mindfulness. So mindfulness, again, to explain this, because it's common usage in society, is not really the meaning in the Dharma. Mindfulness is a mind that has a function that includes recollection or memory. So it recalls that whether a situation is suitable or not, and it recalls the reasons for why a situation is suitable or is not, and what antidotes need to be applied when they do. This is the role of mindfulness. And this is likened then to the soldiers, because there are many aspects to mindfulness, many things to be mindful of, or to recall, many things to recall. The spies, this is likened to the companion to mindfulness, vigilant introspection. This is the mind that, just like a spy, is always watching from the background. This is another consciousness that its sole job is to be aware of our inner world, of our of what's going on in our mind, and to alert us when something goes wrong, when our enemies are at the gates, when the afflictions are present. Then its companion of mindfulness gets involved. And mindfulness, mindfulness in the analogy is like the soldiers. And the soldiers require weapons. So if mindfulness notices that if introspection has noticed that there are afflictions, enemies right there, the soldiers of mindfulness will recall, in order to combat this particular enemy, I need to utilize this kind of weapon. And a weapon that may be called to mind is generosity, so as to deal with a self-centered attitude such as miserliness, or an attitude of patience, or an attitude of ethical restraint. So the various soldiers of mindfulness will call to mind different weapons, namely these various virtuous minds. And if the practitioner or the soldier is particularly skilled, they will be able to utilize nuclear weapons. And the nuclear weapon is the antidote that is the wisdom realizing selflessness, the wisdom realizing emptiness. Because when this is applied, or this can be applied to any affliction, and where it's of particular power, is when applied to the root cause of all afflictions, the ignorance of self-grasping. To be able to, for mindfulness to be able to recall which antidote to use and to apply it skillfully, one requires relying on one's teacher, gaining an education, and gaining skill in utilizing that education. In other words, when introspection recognizes anger, mindfulness, probably with some ease, will remind us anger is never justified. Because anger is easy to recognize as harmful. It's easy to see as an enemy. Then mindfulness reminds us of an antidote. And we will then apply that weapon of an antidote, such as loving kindness, reminding ourselves that this person, or that perhaps if it's someone we're annoyed with, is someone that has many good qualities, and we develop actually a tender attitude towards that person. Then our anger will disappear, because we've applied an antidote, an opposite mind. Or more difficult to recognize is the arisal of attachment. So if introspection recognizes that, then mindfulness needs to be well developed, because attachment we all too easily are deceived by, and we easily follow attachment because we desire something. We think happiness will follow if only I could have this, maybe have my way, or have a particular object. There then, mindfulness needs to remind us, this is being attachment, it deceives us and leads to non-virtue. It strengthens our self-interest, placing ourselves first, and it deceives us over the sources of happiness. And there are many antidotes to apply. Most commonly and easily used is to remind ourselves that what we desire doesn't really exist in this exaggerated, pleasant way, but has many unpleasant features. And in that way, we calm our attachment. But the most powerful antidote of all against this root cause of all our afflictions, is namely the ignorance of self-grasping, is the wisdom realizing selflessness, or what can be called the wisdom realizing emptiness. This is the most powerful one. And it's through utilizing mindfulness and introspection and applying antidotes skillfully, repeatedly, we will weaken our various afflictions. And as our mind becomes a little calmer, more stilled, it becomes easier to apply our understanding of emptiness or selflessness. And that then starts to cut away at our ignorance of self-grasping. And as we weaken that, the thought of, I want, that starts to weaken. So therefore, as our ignorance weakens, the attachment, I want, weakens. And as our ignorance weakens, our self-grasping, our I don't want, the anger, that weakens too. And this we should understand as a process that requires repeated effort over a sustained period. It's not like you gain some insight perhaps in the retreat and then it's all solved, problems are finished. Rather, it's a slow, gradual process whereby as we strengthen the afflictions, as we strengthen the antidotes, we correspondingly weaken the afflictions, because we are becoming ever more habituated to wholesome ways of thinking. So this is the process by which liberation is attained.
Da dusine da dondala nga dusine do shubana tarwa tobe gyudela garche worsen da bo nga zo khowalia gyönchi don khori gyön thong ne khowala tardoge samba khowala tarbe tarbaji tobudu sembe tarba donyi samba de jayaji zo direda diya hoja dine di jane dine nga zuge ata khowala targo ba khowala taryagi gyobge gyoe nibadi suliyore sugyogure lamne jamyo konjusum gyogures gyobni nibadi jamyo konjusum yores hago dine jamyo konjusum gyogures mi yishishedi jamro chedi che 다 되네 다 되니기 내중의 삼바기에 산에 되는 타르바 토예기 된다라 근데 가르쳐서 진바 그 수림 소야다 진배 냠는데 수림 소바 전주 냠는지야 띵띵의 진주야 신의 주야 되네 근데 다음에 봐 대신 가서 쇼하셔야 봐나지 다 가사다 제바제네 다음에 봐또 배시라 예고 어디 고미야디 고미요데 될 때에다 타르바토 보래 타르바토의 유디소래다 내중의 삼바고며 냠로체야 아니 진바 수준 쇠바 전주 삼단제 샤랍제 어디서다 군롱라 소소라니 코르웨 동안을 저지 탈바데 톱고도 셈비 군로치르와 마랑 코르웨 동안을 저지 탈바 톱고도 셈제 탐지게 삼 맞다 맞제 마랑 코르웨 동안 타달을 저지 산지고 탈바 톱고도 셈비 군로라 군로 디 톱이 냠len제디 냠로치야 진바 수준 쇠바 전주 삼단 다음에 봐도 왜 샤랍 냠내지 디다 죽든지도 디 냠수 렘발에 때네 다 타르바토야 돼 토비야 규디디레스 제자다 가지고 닝보레스 닝보 콜 타르바세야 더 닝보들레야 탑람 규디디레스
To summarize then in brief the steps of the meditation by which one will attain liberation. So I mentioned this morning, but just now to summarize. Firstly, one meditates on the sufferings of samsara to get to the point where one generates a determination to achieve liberation, in other words, definite emergence, a determination to gain liberation from the suffering realms of samsara. That's the first step of the meditation and the first primary cause for liberation. The second step of the meditation is one then asks oneself, who has the capacity to protect me? I do not want to suffer anymore. Where can I go for protection? And there we turn to the three jewels for protection or for refuge. So this word refuge also means protection. So we turn to the three jewels for protection from suffering because we know we have faith that's come about in dependence on our studies, that by relying on the teachings of the Buddha, we will transform our mind and thereby gain protection from suffering. This is how we go for refuge to the three jewels with deep faith that through relying on them, we will gain protection from suffering through transforming our own minds. So this is the second step, that of refuge. The first was definite emergence, which comes about with reflecting on the sufferings of samsara. The second is refuge. Then the third is to meditate on the six practices. So in other words, to develop and strengthen minds of ethical restraint, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and the wisdom realizing selflessness. These six. So this then are the six practices, the six stages of one's meditation to engage in repeatedly to attain liberation. This has as its goal liberation from samsara for oneself. One's focus throughout this meditation is on one's own situation, recognizing how I am suffering and thereby giving to the determination, I want to gain freedom. So it's in relation to oneself. And then one goes for refuge, knowing that three jewels can guide one to gain protection from suffering for oneself. And then one engages in those six practices, ethics to the wisdom realizing selflessness. This then is how one attains liberation for oneself from samsara entirely.
메류 닝보롱 세닝보롱야 될다 닝보레 닝보 초도 주바 산유고 바디 레나디 다마 라요로와다 디르다 닝보 초도 주바 산유고 바디 대지사다 닝보 초도 주바 산유고 바디 토에게 탑람들다 냠렌지데 림바데 카레라네 당아주 도시네 대시 셰바나신 녜레 지바레다 건주 네 가서 거의 동아지 고 동아디 삼제 동아 거의 동아 삼다 소당보 소수되는 삼다 다당아주 기부 딩기 람냠네 집에가로 소수이 되는 거의 동아 사대 타고 준비 삼다로와 나 되네기 기부 딩기 로를 장녀 녀마 로를 장사와 진네 다디 야 둠되오요래 곧니 녀마 기부 딩기 갑기 로지 투모 로 장사는 되네 제려야 다 산조고만 토에 삼다이도 니 동아디 다디 대지 나랑 동을 타고 섬로와 디파 카디 미유디 제베 잡제 나랑 잡라 샘전 탐제 샘전 탐제 대화 되바다 동어미도 찍바래 제가 샘전 탐제 대화 되바래 동어미도 봐 나랑다 찍기야 켜봐 가면 지금 샘전 차상 아니 대화 되바다 동어미도 샘전 차상 이런 요 말해서 찍기야 해서 제가 어두스네 샘전 탐제 땅님 샘전 탐제 땅님 다 샘전 탐제 라래 대화 되바에 찍바래 동어미도 봐 찍바래 샘전 탐제 예망 안줄이야 저 여바다 차사 찍바랬으면 샘전 탐제 디 야가래 디 두가래 가야마 찍기야 인심be 샘전 탐제라 땅님 공비하데 삼나다야시 다디 고 데네 삼다다 리테 냠내지라 먼저 홍보 또 중앙 멤버들이 또 땅님 삼다 대 땅님 삼다네 데네야 니베들 가서 샘전 탐제 다랑나 저 여바 샘전 제 랑디 직 안디니 깨와 망보 레면바서나 샘진 디자는 깨와 말렘바세 요 말스 진짜 깨와 가마가마디와 네 파마 제형이 장자래서 삼다이름 제 두스체 삼다이는 다 가르리게 돼서는 파마 제형도 파미 부들 파 지게형도 파미 부들 배 점점 제직 부충충 파 수여제 파 전부 맞아 롭종 마튼 봐도 파미기 따도 치고 진짜 파마세 빼랑을 진천본 좋아스 진짜 당아 샘전 탐쟁이 아마제 용화 자제래가 샘전 탐지 부구제 용화 자제래 진짜가 부구지디가라 샘전 탐쟁이 아마제디가 병알이야 판도 쇼제여 그린 제여 진짜 샘전 탐지 빼랑게 마제 용화랑을 진천본 그린 천본에서 어두시는 삼당고 그래제래 진짜 다 디네 삼당도 다 숨버들라 하는 샘전 탐지를 오당알 그리 치면서 니 파래 샘전이야 팬베지 두긴 그린 파 섭긴 샘베 삼당 고래제다 두스네 이거래제 숨바 자라다 마시 당님제 마시 진전바 세워 최고다 당보다 지난 코르웨 동화 삼야데데 삼서와 지다다 코르웨 샘전 탐조 코르웨 동화라 타고 구도 세베다 랑이 코와라 타고 니마 삼서바 아니 gemru 리그로 일이 말하거든요. 나 gemru 데데 리그 제마 고 리그 gemru 고 같이 망골레셔 그래.
If we just look briefly at the text to the second verse, that fourth line, where it mentions now is the time to fulfill this life's potential. And there we spoke about how the word literally is to take the essence. We mentioned that there are three ways to take the essence or fulfill the potential of this life. And that's either to create the causes to attain a further excellent rebirth, or greater than that, to create the causes for and progress towards cultivating a mental path, leading towards attaining individual liberation from samsara. That was the second. And then the third is what I'll talk about now, because this is the final one remaining, is to create the causes that will lead to cultivating a path, a mental path, that will lead to the attainment of full and complete enlightenment, of Buddhahood. Now for this third one, it comes about independence on a deep training in the former two methods, in particular, that in relation to the trainings of individual liberation. If one has reflected well on those previous steps I've just summarized, then to move into this third level, where one's goal becomes enlightenment, is very easy. It's very easy then to bridge over to this far greater motivation. So in the prior steps, one went through these three of reflecting on the sufferings of samsara in relation to one's own experience. Oneself doesn't want to fall to the lower realms. One does not want to even remain in the upper realms. One develops definite emergence. I want to gain freedom from suffering. And then one may have meditated further, certainly on refuge and certainly likely on ethical restraint, etc., up to selflessness. Now, in dependence on that prior training, The bridge to this third step is this. One recognizes that whilst my focus has solely been on my own situation, I am suffering and I don't want to. I face all these potential sufferings, such as the lower realms, and I don't want to suffer there. And I suffer in the ways that I do because of my afflictions and the contaminated karma they accrue. This is my situation, and I want to definitely emerge from this. But what I'm describing, whilst it is my own lived situation, it is the same for everyone else. It's not just me. So this is the bridge where one lifts one's meditative gaze from one's own situation and starts to recognize everyone that I care for, everyone I'm close to, also is desperate to gain freedom from suffering. In fact, everyone in this life I've ever cared for has a deep wish to be free of suffering and doesn't want to experience any problems or difficulties. And this we know because these are people we know and care for. But in reality, actually, this is the same for all beings, whether I know them well or not. No one wants to suffer. No one welcomes problems in their life. Everyone wants to abide in lasting happiness. So this is the bridge where we lift our gaze from ourselves and apply what we've learnt and meditated on to others, and we see it applies entirely. Here the conclusion of this first step is this deep recognition. There is no difference between myself and others. At a fundamental level, we are the same. Superficially, many differences, but they are superficial. At a fundamental level, we are all the same. And this first step is the meditation on impartiality or equanimity, where we recognize that we really are all the same. There is no difference between us. Then the second step, and again this is based on those preliminaries. Now the second step is, this is not my first rebirth. This rebirth came about independent on causes I created in previous lives. And that life, the life immediately previous to this, came about independent on causes created in lives previous to that. And that life, the life previous to that, so 2 ago, this also came about independence on causes. There is no beginning to this. I have experienced rebirth upon rebirth upon rebirth. Here one is making one's mind very expansive. In the first step, one made one's mind expansive in terms of recognizing myself and all beings are the same on a fundamental level. Now we're making our mind expansive in a second way by reflecting that over innumerable lifespans, in unimaginable life forms, and over an inconceivable span of time, I've taken rebirth after rebirth. And in each of those rebirths, I would have had born into a family, cared for by a mother. And I would have been cared for with the same tenderness that I received in this life, in particular, when I was entirely vulnerable, when I was in her womb, when I was as little, and I couldn't fend for myself at all. She cared for me. And in the same way I was cared for in this life, I was cared for by my mother of the previous life, who would have held me as tenderly as my mother in this life. And likewise with my life previous to that and the life previous to that. So here in the second meditation, the second step of the meditation, we recognize how over this vast expanse of time, we've had a close and intimate relationship with each and every being. They've all shown us tremendous kindness and care. So here our mind, or our heart opens to others. We feel deep affection for them, a tenderness towards them. Then, in dependence on that, the third step of the meditation comes easily. I have an obligation to repay their kindness. They cared for me when I was at my most vulnerable. I cannot neglect them when they are in need, when they long for happiness too. That's the third step, the determination to repay the kindness that others have shown us.
당에 심전에 펜버 두기 심지 바질레 저기 심베 삼다이더 단이 되네 디젤에 가슴던 제가 심전 탐절이야 대화 구고레스 제가 심전 탐절 대화 매바자 가실래 대화의 폰도 대화 말아야 돼 제가 심전 탐절에 대화 구고도 제가 심전 탐절에 디기 템퍼쇼 선비게 삼다이더 다 잡아 공부 디곰 다 심전 대화다 된고도 템퍼쇼 선비 공제 디젤이야 안데 심전 대화대 거 둥하다 맞잖아 진짜 대화대 템바 민도 진짜 심전 탐절 둥하 있나 되셔 진짜 둥하대 자고도 진짜 심전 탐절 둥하다 자워쇼 선비기다 니지고미야 되래 진짜다 니네게 잠바다 니지고음 세딜리월 심전 대화대 템퍼쇼 선비 삼다다 심전 탐절 둥하다 자워쇼 선비 삼다데 잠바 공부하다 니지고바지고 디니 두 삼당고 그래지래
So this addition to what the meditation mentioned earlier, that in relation to generating definite emergence. Now I've mentioned 3 steps. One, recognizing, developing impartiality, recognizing the equality between ourselves and others. Secondly, recognizing that since beginningless time, we've had a relationship, developed close and intimate relationships with others. Now thirdly, the wish arises to repay that kindness. Then the 4th step, if we ask ourselves, what is it that others want? This immediately ties us to that first step of the meditation, recognizing that we are all at a fundamental level the same, in that we want happiness and we want to be freed of suffering. This is what others want from us, more so than any other gift or situation you could bestow on others. What others want at the fundamental level is happiness. Here then, in this 4th step, one trains in love. Love is the wish, may others be happy. In other words, may their minds be at peace, never experiencing any problems or difficulties. And that then links to the second half of this 4th point, compassion. Compassion is the wish, may others be free of suffering. So these two we can cultivate in either order, and they can come together. The mind of love is wanting others to be happy. This comes easily in dependence on the tender attitude one has developed in those former steps. And then so too does compassion, wanting others to be freed of suffering.
anda denegi simje dewa demba sho sewada simje dumada jawo sho simbeki niche jambada niche komyode dene komyode gali simli ningdo bulma son be chik charjin denegi semshu charjin da simje namji dunga dingi jawo do simbe da semshu da simje tamji dunga gyule yenda dunga de ga dingi sego do konsul digi dia ngi dugi simbeki da semshu li gores 지난 dene zada koron ge karsin denegi nyamne jedo da 다 심지어 탐지 동아디야 네 세계 심지어 탐지 디기디야 네 두긴 제가 심지어 탐지 코르에 동아디레 드레지야 상예살 거긴 선비게다 샘슈직 두스체네 삼당고레제 삼당고 되네게 삼당공고레 데라야 사삼남다시고레제다 대시 잠바다 대시 잠바세 심지어 대화데 데나쇼 덴버쇼 셈베 삼노시 니지세데 심지어 동아나 자와쇼 셈베 삼노시 내가 다 딜레 캐버도 파와지 샘전 동안은 자고도 동안 자와도 내지긴 샘전 이제 되기 된고 대화도 댐바도 내지긴 그래서 샘전 좀 코에 동안들 자제 야상에서 내 거긴 있어야지 되니게 샘슈시 공고래서 네가 공고 뒤 고미야를 냠는 제들이야 삼노들라 학삼 남달라고 그러지 대지 니제당 잠바다 니진이래 캐버도 파바 하바자 숙체와자 학삼 남다스 그러지
The 4th step was the cultivation of love and compassion. As one engages in this meditation, often one's love and compassion arise ever more easily and are ever deeper and more transformative, because this is the process of meditation as one gains familiarity with any of these virtuous minds. And we'll come then to a point, at first it's really intellectual, but then it will start to become real, where our love and compassion is very strong for others, and we start to feel this mere wish of mine that is really heartfelt. May others abide in happiness, free of suffering. That this love and compassion is sincere, it's heartfelt. But that is insufficient. It's insufficient that I merely want others to be happy. I need to do something about it. I need to take responsibility for their situation. I can't merely leave it up to others. I need to help. I have a responsibility to these kind mother sentient beings. And this is where we generate a deep sense of responsibility. It is my responsibility that I guide others to gain freedom from suffering, the lasting state of happiness that is Buddhahood. It is my responsibility to guide them to achieve that state. This generation of responsibility, whereby we take the sincere love and compassion that has arisen within us, and we don't remain content with a mere wish, but now we commit to action. Now we commit ourselves to helping. This mind of responsibility is called either the wholehearted resolve, or it's called the altruistic attitude of universal responsibility. This is where we take responsibility for the welfare of others.
아니 내게 semjen 담제 동화다 네 자고도 제디 당이 자제 상에서라 꾸긴세베 삼로 닝도 침을 끼어도 지나다 되네 semjen 동화다 자고도 semjen 동화 자야리아 가르 용 동화데 가르치 용도 대지 다음에 봐 삼단하들 리고다 되래 다음에 봐 제바제리고 지사 동화 용야데 규디 자와라 니 규디 매봐 쏘고 그랬어 규 가르라다 녀모바 레라 녀모바래 들리고 제가 녀모바데야 자와세데 되자 콩도 델레티 용도스 제가 랑라 되자던 콩도게나 랑마기와 강하수요 쇠바마지 샬레야 강하수요도 왔 디나제 semjen 수수이나 콩로사나 기부요 말고 콩로사나 코로나 강하요레 샬레야 강하되고 제가 semjen 코로나기라 되자께서나 코로나 강하 샬레야 강하되 제가다 semjen deje 강하되게 동어요 유디가선 되자 콩도 녀모바디게 되샤스 제자다 녀몽바디 가르레디니 기도스베 나 세베다 semjen 수수이나 소소나 나 세베 삼로 줘봐다 제가 나 세베 삼 대징아 주 줘세바나 나 세베 삼로 디체 제가 나 세베 삼로 리어디 디기 나 세케데 나래 녀고도 진짜 아니 파코라야다 나래 디고도 세메 되샤기야 디용도와 제자다 녀몽바기에 주조 나 세베 나 라시 나 세디 nga dato chupa tempa chupa zimbe tenzin de ligdus chesa dati nga seba samda do nganzo gandes khogdu sene nga deji sheba na phumbo da rangi phumbo da 지금 풍봉가 보다 차시다 가마도 코롱 원이여 주변 나지 남 딘나와 나신 다가라 진진바디다 델레 디뇨모 버 뇨사 자와 주어 디리샤디 덴지 마릭 바리샤스 다디 디원이 진바나 하신지 두에 면도 고 딱고 매바서 투구를 두고 말이고 고 매바서 마도나 뇨모 매바서 투야메 데노 심젤이야 코 심젤 동아세 투야 민도스 세상 고 매바서 투야 예나 다 심젤 뇨모 매바서 투그래 심젤 동아세 투야 도스 제네 제바 제도 세상 디 데네 도스 제바 제도 심젤 나 라신 주바 제 풍보라 마도바 간라마 랑공원에 주베 동화디 또요도 동방이 또 오래제래 제가 동방이 또에게 마치 디켄산들 또 오래제네 되네 제바제 되네 동방이 또 오래 동방이 또요도 되네 녀모바 사번 박차를 제바 뻥 두고요 바데 또요도 상계고 방문에 도고다 동 디갑스 통고래제 되네 또서 이제 오다 상요고 뭐 토야도 제상에 샘젠 탐지기 녀모바세 투구도 녀보 두 고미야도 제자 등의 녀보도 콘솔레 때 콘솔로 검주 되는 게 콘솔 사이사를 거기 세지 어두시네다 되네기 네 삼다제 동방이 디가 동방이 또왜 제래야 다 대시 맞아 기부 딩이 값을 동반이 또 세외 제라 탈바 원에 도그래라서 다디 값을 다다 동반이 또왜 제소다 네 산주고 와토기어 바디 도르고 그래 지산 디스 도어지네 되네 어다 현이 샘제 동아세 투구동의 산주 또 톱투의 뉴버 톱투구도 때야기 탑람도 샘베다 되는 지지가 거기서 그래 뽑을 마소나 뽑 숙체기 두고 그랬다 닝도 플라마 닝도 첨불이 거래지래 다들 심게 신의 시기로 와. 시시래, 다들 신의 레유리다.
So in the previous step then, we took responsibility for the welfare of others, their attaining freedom from suffering, attaining a state of lasting happiness, we take as our own individual responsibility. So this is a very powerful mind. One of the translations is wholehearted resolve. Another is altruistic attitude of universal responsibility. So this is a very powerful mind. Then at this point, one can engage then in the sixth step of the meditation, which will be very similar to what we've heard in the previous meditation. So here, having generated this altruistic attitude, this determination to help others gain freedom from suffering and abide in lasting happiness, we ask ourselves this rhetorical question, because by now we know the answer. What is it that keeps others suffering? Why are they suffering? The root cause of their suffering is the ignorance of self-grasping. It's from believing that the self exists in a particular way that the thought of I and then want comes, so the attachment and the resulting suffering. And the I don't want and the repulsion of anger and the resulting suffering. So the root cause of their suffering is this self-grasping. So if I'm going to fulfill this commitment I've made, live up to this responsibility I have wholeheartedly and willingly from my own side taken on, it is my responsibility to guide them to gain freedom from this suffering, for freedom from this ignorance of self-grasping, because that is the root cause of their suffering. But in order to do so, I have to be sure that this can be done. So now's the part that's very similar to before, because right now we've been talking about others. So we just ask ourselves in this meditation, how does the I appear, which is as independent, and does it exist in this way or not? Because if it is independent, then our root cause of our suffering cannot be eradicated, and all we can do is make the best of a bad situation. But we know from our own meditations already that the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. We remind ourselves of that. And especially if we've done this meditation many times, this reminding ourselves of it will be powerful, because you'll once again cultivate a wisdom understanding selflessness, or the wisdom understanding emptiness. And here we gain confidence. I see for myself that this ignorance of self-grasping, or that this self-grasping is an ignorance. I can understand reality. This is not beyond me. The texts are true. I'm recognizing this. That means I can eradicate this ignorance of self-grasping and attain Buddhahood. And if I can, so too can others. They just need the guidance to be able to do so. Therefore, my own attainment of Buddhahood is possible, as well as the attainment for others. So much of this meditation has been done before, the sixth step. The key difference is twofold. One, we start out by asking about others, not about ourselves, and therefore we come to a different conclusion. Before, the conclusion was the determination to gain individual liberation from samsara. Here the determination is to attain Buddhahood for the sake of others.
세상 다 심전지 동아시아 단 디규트비에기 탑람디 다 두세다 탑람 통화를 하고 살에 세상 탑람 여봐서 대 탑람디 다 콘솔이야 현심전마 지게 시에 콘솔마 롭된제 콘솔라 냠조 렌주로 와다 세상 탑람디 가르센데다 대신 아주 저거 셰바나지 다 탑람디 진바 수팀 쇠바 전주 삼다 딩이진 다 동방이 또 비해랍디 다 심전마 현달라 시에제 콘솔라 냠소 렌주 데네 냠소 렌네 데네야 안주 코로스 디기다 디기레 야고야다 산예살 고야 디 제오로 다디 제오도 나고 다 데네게 삼는 야자다 삼나 가르당 거라서 다 심전셀베 바스메바 가신의 연된 균에 학교쇼 가신의 연된 배 야고 예현 안에 가신다 눈도로다 데네 시에나 하모간 데네게 심지 망부여 나 감다 뭐바다 직자 말아 여러바다 데네자다 나라는 헤디 신시엘이야 나라를 디수 콘솔레 시에가 연된 차사데 민두다 제상 니 콘솔레 판도 제국어데 만지 니 나랑게다 판도 제투에 날 뉴버 민두스 제상다 심지 차상레 로버 제발라 심지 감다 뭐바다 아니 콘솔레 최대야 가르가르 때네 판도 체여봐 가르 띵고봐 띵고봐 아니 자상하다 하고 고고래스 제가 되네기다 냐 심전에 펜버 두얘기 딱술 야쇼 술에서는 다 상계를 샤스 제가 상계에서 균 탐제단 자와래 연된 차상 톱사와래 제가 다 주버 가르 뜀번의 주버 넘버 가르 뜀번의 뜀 투에요 뉴버여래 캠비에 연된 제에 연된 뉴비에 연된 뻥베 연된 뉴바 차상 저도 바데 폰순 소바데 상기레 현리아 판도 제기 탑초도 유바데 상기레샤 제자 당에 상기기 심전에 펜버 주발라 내 상기 이거 바데 마도나 탑민도 대장에 심전 탐지게 상기 심전에 펜버 주야 되던다라 아니 상기 이거 바 토벌 진선 심전 탐지게 상기 이거 바 토벌 쇼 세베 대심기 거래 자주 심기 거래 제라 도친다 자주 심기에 용거래 제라 캠비연된 제연된 뉴비연된 느뻥비연된 빵바 근데 틀리게 연된 사용을 하더니 그
So there was the sixth step. Then the seventh step in this meditation is the recognition that the help others need from the help that others need, and therefore the help that I will give them, is they need to be guided in the same way that I am being guided. They need to be guided, in particular, in developing good qualities such as ethics, generosity, patience, and so forth. Also, they need to be guided in coming to understand suffering more deeply, and then later, eventually, the causes of suffering. And then they also need to be further guided in ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and eventually concentration and wisdom. This is what sentient beings need. Because this is the unmistaken method by which liberation and enlightenment is achieved. And I have already experienced the benefits of this training and can see for myself that enlightenment is possible. Lasting happiness, therefore, is possible. Now, in order to be able to help others, I have a real challenge. Because when I think just about the people that I know, as far as I can tell, there's a great variety amongst them. Some really have good qualities. They seem to be really decent people and have great qualities. Others less so, and others really aren't very nice. So we see there's really quite some variety, and people starting at very different points. And therefore, the kind of guidance each person needs is really quite different. Then there are the vast number of humans I do not know, and then what about all the non-humans? And then amongst people, amongst beings, whilst we can divide them in various categories, these are better, these are okay, these really aren't so good. Even within there, each and every being has their own individual personality due to the complexities of their own individual karmic backgrounds and therefore their individual spiritual dispositions. I really haven't a clue how to help each person correctly. I really don't have a clue. I am still a practitioner who's evolved a little, but I have a long way to go. So how on earth can I help all these beings? So here one is being driven by the sense of responsibility that we've taken up, this wholehearted resolve. It's not an intellectual exercise, it's a determination. I have to help others. So we're asking ourselves, who has the capacity to help? And again, the answer will be known to us. That is a Buddha. A Buddha is the only being who has completely eradicated their continuum of any trace of fault, which means every good quality is developed completely or perfectly. Therefore, the qualities of the Buddha's omniscience, it's solely a Buddha who has omniscience, and therefore the wisdom or the omniscience of a Buddha is unrivaled, and thereby they can help beings in an unrivaled manner. So too, the loving kindness, the compassion of a Buddha is unrivaled because it's not impeded by any fault on their mind. Thirdly, it's more difficult to translate. It's either power or capacity or potential. Maybe the capacity of the Buddha is also unrivaled. The Buddha is not limited in any way. They are not limited in the way that even very developed people are, because every fault on their continuum has been eradicated. Then the fourth quality of the Buddha, so wisdom, loving kindness, capacity, and then the fourth, enlightened activities. Because the Buddha faces no restriction, because their mind is completely pure, they can help others in ways that are unimaginable, inconceivable. This is the perfect being to help this vast array of beings. I will become a Buddha. This is where one generates the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. The bodhicitta has these two components. This one here, of I will become a Buddha, and the one mentioned previously, in order to free all beings from suffering, to lead all beings to a state freed from suffering. This is the mind of bodhicitta, and this is generated here in the seventh step.
Dine da janju sim ke bare so da di chesa da janju sim ke sayu chela da semja tham sanju ko ba thoba chi janju sim be kunye lang je da nyamne je de dejin na chi ba da lu surim so ya jinbe nyamne je ya swebe nyamne je junde nyamne je ya ne samde nyamne tingizin nyamne je ya dine dongba yi do be sherap nyamne je di ran le da nyamne je di chi ho chesa dus nyamne je 안디 냠렌제 샤엘야 안제게 도시는 냠렌제요도 데니 제주 심기 심비 토네 파신주의 냠렌제요도 데니 산요고 와토비 타르 안 녀모바 바샤다 제바 빵요도 네 산요고 와토바레 세월티자라 저기 닝보 초도 교바 산제고 바디 토비 탑람디 규디다 도시네 당보 제주 심기야라 마네 당용 당보래 내가 저기 코위에 님에서 코발에 타두고 삼바지야 되는 점로 삼다야 된디야 랑지고 많이 봐 시행심자 탐지 찍고 동아되어 받아 되어되어 찍바를 심자 탐지 예령요 말세 땅님 삼다 는 심자는 저랑게 마이 제용와 샤다를 되는 제비 갑라 하는 랑리야 배 그린 친구 냐냐 판도 친구슈 냐냐래 제용와 냐냐래 삼다 되는 야파 심젤이야 냐파 콘솔레 펜베 두기 셈베 삼다 데네 잠바콤 데네 니지오콤 데네 하사 남다데콤 디바라데 량pon이 삼다 돈이 또비 저이다 데네 삼자 탐지 산요코바 토버쇼 세베 자슈 셈게 다 자슈 셈게 세베 제라 다 자슈 셈 요군네라 산요코바 토비 치도 다 진바다 수련 세바 전례 삼데 셰랍 돈방이 또비 셰랍 냠는제 디 냠는제 발라 데네 타라 안 산요코바 토고래 제레 다 산요코바 토비 규디 디소레다 대시 ngazu 타바토의 규리라 내중다 점로 세대고 이어바시로와 디가데 짐바 추준 세버준의 삼텐디게 냠내지 와시오로와 지여바제 다다데들 딜레하바 가르둘랍나 semja tanyum gomya da semja jaranga mashi gomya an dinchen boy mo gomya dene de la jamba gomya ninje gomya lhasa namda gomya an jashu semje tie odi lama ri do an da jashu sem ku ne la de jimba chu so bo chu ne nyam de samden shera nyam de jewa de de shi de ji ba cha gu wa.
Then the eighth and final step of the meditation is that now, having generated bodhicitta, which is this determination in order to become a Buddha, in order to free all beings from suffering, having generated bodhicitta, one is now a bodhisattva. But in order to progress through the bodhisattva paths and grounds, one needs to do something. Merely generating bodhicitta will not make one a Buddha. One needs to do something. And what one does, and these you've heard before, one trains one's mind in ethical restraint, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. The wisdom realizing emptiness or selflessness. So this is now the eighth and final step in the meditation. One can meditate on these. And by this point, one is very familiar with these meditations. One did them in the preliminaries extensively, where one was meditating on these 6 practices. Now that one has generated this motivation of bodhicitta, these 6 practices are called 6 perfections. Because bodhicitta is this a mind of love and compassion that is so powerful that it makes the practice of each of these 6 practices, or training in each of these 6 practices, incredibly powerful. Because you're not doing it solely for your own benefit. You're doing it for the benefit of immeasurable living beings. So here, the power of the responsibility you hold, expressed as bodhicitta, means your ethics, your generosity, your patience, and so forth. It's incredibly powerful. In particular, when it comes to the wisdom. Or before we talk on wisdom. So this is why each of these 6 practices, when conjoined with bodhicitta, aren't called 6 practices, but 6 perfections. Because of being conjoined with bodhicitta, they will eventually be developed to the point of being perfected. Or this word perfected can also be translated as completed. In other words, developed to its fullest extent possible. That's why these are called perfections. Because they will eventually be perfected in the continuum of a perfect being, a Buddha. And this power that bodhicitta brings to each of these meditations means, in particular, the wisdom can go so much deeper. Whilst the wisdom realizing selflessness or emptiness is the same for a bodhisattva or a practitioner striving for their own individual liberation, the realization is the same, but the strength of the realizing mind is vastly superior when conjoined with bodhicitta because of the power of this responsibility that bodhicitta brings to the consciousness. And therefore, it doesn't only eradicate the afflictions together with their seeds, like the quality of the wisdom for the practitioner of individual liberation, but it can even it has the power to eliminate the imprints or stains of the afflictions. And that is the final step that's required to purify the mind completely and to attain the perfected state of Buddhahood. So these then are the 8 causes or the 8 steps of the meditation to engage in, to attain Buddhahood. Many of them apply to that of liberation, but not all. So to repeat just briefly these 8 steps, the first is to recognize to develop impartiality, which is recognizing at a fundamental level we are all the same in wanting happiness. Secondly, is to recognize that over innumerable rebirths since beginningless time, I have developed close and affectionate relationships with every being. And in the same way as I have a responsibility for those who show me kindness right now, I have a responsibility to those who showed me kindness a few years ago or earlier in this life. There's no difference. And there's no difference between those who showed me kindness and care in lives previous to this. That's the second step. Develop to the point where we're developing a deep tenderness or affection towards others. This leads us easily into this third step of the wish to repay the kindness. And wish is a little weak. It's more of a deep yearning to repay this kindness, as if we have a debt. And it's not acceptable, I just ignore it. I need to repay the kindness. The fourth step is the meditation on love and compassion, which comes about in answer to, well, how do others want their kindness repaid? What is it they want from me? More than any superficial gift or even a wonderful situation we could maybe provide. They want lasting happiness and a state freed of suffering. So love and compassion is the wish. May beings abide in lasting happiness. That's love and compassion. May they abide free of suffering. Then the fifth step is to develop this further, love and compassion, where this aspiration, as heartfelt as it is, we find that no longer acceptable. It's not enough merely to want someone to be happy. I must help them become happy. And this is where we develop wholehearted resolve, where we take responsibility for others gaining freedom from suffering. Then in the sixth step, we meditate on emptiness, reminding ourselves that liberation, or enlightenment rather, enlightenment is possible. The seventh step then is the generation of bodhicitta, where we know we lack the capacity to actually be able to guide others because we still need to improve ourselves. And even as we advance, there are so many beings with their own unique personalities. I have to become a Buddha, because only a Buddha can interact with others in an ideal manner in every situation. This then is the generation of bodhicitta, the determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others. And then the eighth and final step is the meditation on the 6 perfections of ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. So amongst these 8, many you heard previously. So if one had been meditating first in relation to oneself, reflecting on the sufferings of samsara, giving rise to definite emergence, meditating on emptiness, going for refuge, all of that's your preliminary. Then you would have also back then been meditating on ethics and so forth. So now you build on that foundation and can move quickly through these 8 steps.
다 약쇼의 니보 다 산요고 방토야체 제자 니보래 세데 니보래 니보도 숨여로와다 제자다 개와치마 문제 고방 토야게 니보딜레게 규딜레 가르세네 진바 수준서바 준주 냠는 제와 진바 냠는 자 수준 냠는 자 세베 냠는 자 준주 냠는 제바 디제 디 냠는 제바 지바래 이내도 군로데 가르쳐서는 개와치마 원주의 고바 잠마도 되니 듬바마도 매일 군로디 제자디 인자 군로 충충인자 진바 수준 수배 냠는 제디 디 니바디도 충충마도 매발에 판연디 나야 타르비 고방 토발라양 군롱데라 코위 둥알에 차제 타르비 고방 녀모바 사본나 제바 빵빵빵랑 타르바 토고도 셈베 타르바 되니 삼보 군로디 군네라제 안 냠는 제대가 진바 수준 쇠바 전주 삼단데 대시 원료 고방 토발라 삼된다 시럽디기 냠는 제고예요 말에 마제네 토고래 제나에 교요 말에 로와다 다다데 타르비 고방 토발라 진바 수준 쇠바 전주 제디가라 삼된 제딩이 진주고야다 되네 다음에 봐도 시라 냠는 제고래스 다디 진비 냠는 수준 냠는 디게 대시 원료 고방 토예게 된다 군네라제 수준 송하다 진바 당와래 쇠남데 다데디 탈비 고마 돈이게 삼나 군론 디토네 진바도 수준 쇠바다 개와디 빼지 슈치 탈바고 탈비 고마 마도 봐도 개와지 니거래지 네네거래 지든 슈치와래 나양 산지 고마 토발라 다 군론딜레 셈chen 탐지게 된다라 산지 고마 토발치기 대 셈chen 탐지레 편지주에 산지 고마 토비 7동에 근데 냠슬링이 시대 군론디 군내라제 냠슬레데 진바 수준 쇠바 준주 삼전 셰랍제 디죽들이 제사다 군론딜레 셈chen 탐지게 된다 산지 고마 토비 군론디다 군론디 마세 개체모 누바시모 휴진자 미 체도자와 셈년 탐지기도 한다. 톱자 탈도 산지고방 니 된다래야 군농 장주 셈디 여반자 니 군내 라제 진바의 수리수배 냠는 제바자 진비 냠는 ben에 세 셈전지야 칼라사가 감강지 제외네 디 판연디 마세 개침 버리서다. 제가 제 셈전 탐지기도 산지고방 장주 셈유 군내 라제 진바 다야다 쇠바 구며 수림 되니게 순라자데 판유데 빼 맞아 개천부 진짜 니네기 진비 냠는 제디 진비 쇠남이 제보 쇠남디 셈전 탐제 상기에 고방 마속에 봐도 라이게 해서 요래서 진짜 니네기 개천부래서 진짜디 군롱코롱 개천부 군롱기 토네 냠는 제 진바 수준 쇠바 준주 냠는 제 직배 있나요 군롱 개천부에서 니기 냠는 진비 냠는 수준 냠는 빼 쇠남 개천부 다 군론도 딩딩이나 쇠남디에 딩딩 다 군론 춘지지마도 매나 아니 진비 냠는 게 제보대야 춘추마도 매바라 다는 군론에 체디점게 소수기디 파지 제번의 술에 나라지 라야기도 나선 파지 제번의 진바도 체거래 이나 소수기 파전의 술에 파지 제번 콜량의 야고 제번 제망할 콜이 수 야고 지그레 삼제 진바스타베네 디 진비기 제보도 춘주 체딜마도 판도하메래 제가 치마라 용평이 말해서 제가 되니기 군롱의 토네 땅아주게 쇠남 치셔도 뒤두고 제가 산지에 고모 토에게 장주심유 군내 랑제 냠는 제바인데 다디 개와 빠도 매바 첨보래 해서 월다 딜레 채와 준거 말해지래
So to answer the question of how to live a greatly meaningful life, or how to fulfill this life's potential, as we've seen, there are three ways. Either striving to achieve an excellent rebirth in our next life, or striving to achieve liberation from cyclic existence, or the supreme goal of striving for Buddhahood itself. So these are the three various ways to live a meaningful life, striving to cultivate causes for one of those goals. Where these three differ is less so in the various practices or trainings, ways one trains one's mind, but much more so in the quality of the motivation and therefore the impact on one's mind of that same training. So let's first look at the similarity. So with the smallest of goals, that of attaining an excellent rebirth, then one engages in four trainings: ethical restraint, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance. So as the motivation is just looking at our next life, the virtue that one creates is quite weak, quite limited. Especially when compared to someone who doesn't even think of their next lives, but it's weak compared to someone who has a greater motivation, namely the second, that of liberation, where one is striving to gain liberation from samsara, and thereby is striving to abandon afflictions together with their seeds. So here, one engages in those same four reflections: ethics, generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance, but also must engage in concentration and wisdom realizing selflessness or emptiness. There are two then additional meditations. These may have been done with the motivation for a good rebirth. There's no fault in cultivating concentration or wisdom in relation to attaining a good rebirth, but it's not required. but to attain liberation, to develop concentration and wisdom is indispensable. So here, with such a motivation, one's mind is looking at a far greater goal. Therefore, one's determination needs to be much stronger. One's definite emergence needs to be incredibly powerful, and thereby one's determination, one's motivation is much stronger. This means the merit that one accumulates is stronger, because the quality of the mind is more powerful. The third way to live a meaningful life is to strive to accumulate the causes that lead to Buddhahood, with a determination to be of great benefit to others, to be of benefit to others in the most meaningful of ways. So here the practices one trains one's mind in are the same as one has heard. First, those same first four: ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and then those same additional two: concentration and wisdom. These are all the same. The goal of Buddhahood requires a greater abandonment, not just the afflictions together with their seeds, but also their imprints. And for the wisdom to be that powerful, it requires to be conjoined with bodhicitta. But the two key points I'm making here are the similarities in the meditations between these 6 practices, but because of the quality of the motivation, the merit that same meditation produces is incomparably different. And this is because a motivation to achieve a good rebirth is an excellent motivation, but it is not going to be a mind of a strength that is comparable to a determination to gain liberation. That is an incredibly powerful mind, because one is needing to do something so much bigger, achieve something so much greater. And so too for Buddhahood, which is exponentially greater in terms of the strength of motivation required, because here one is thinking of the situation of each and every mother sentient being. This is an incredibly powerful mind. Therefore, the merit created from those practices is so much greater. So to give a very simple illustration, if one gives some leftover food to perhaps your pet at home, or maybe outside for the insects or the birds, and one just does that as in giving something away, like throwing something away, not much merit is created, because this is the mind just focused on this life. But if one does so as to create virtuous causes to have a good rebirth, that's a better motivation, more merit from the exact same act is achieved. If one practices that generosity with a wish to gain liberation, perhaps even with an understanding of emptiness, but having as a goal liberation, the motivation behind that same act is very different. And so too then, if one's motivation is to become a Buddha, the act is the same. If you're giving to your pet, they're receiving the same food, they're just as happy. But the impact on your mind, because your focus, your determination is so much greater, the impact on your own mind is so much stronger. Therefore, the merit is greater. And the greater the merit means it will abide on our continuum, having an impact until that goal is achieved. So therefore, if the motivation is Buddhahood, that merit of feeding your dog, that motivation, that merit will remain with one until enlightenment's achieved. So therefore, the second key point, the first was to remind you of the similarity of the trainings, but the second key point was the importance of motivation. Because in dependence on the quality of the motivation, in particular when it's sincere, that same practice has an incredibly different result.
Dine zada anjo kunlo samlo yu thone kewa juye de Geshe Thubten Rabten de kunlo samlo yu thone ndogo re shi za kunlo de dine ge da kunlo Geshe more ese disungorwa dine zada janju sim yu kunye lamba ne dile ne geza chiwati chasa yomares. Chesandini zadangan jugi jikidina, jigandu chu jidi nyamne jinyelaya, sangyu chodang sokyu chodamla janju pardo tane jesoji, dagi jinso gibeso jola penja sangyu jubo sho sayadi, chesanda nganjugi chu nyanshi jibi nyelaya, sangyu chodomo tuyadi, kunlong jugorwa, chesan sangyu chodang sokyu chodam janju pardo tane jesoji kiamjoji. Andelia, Dagi Jinsoji, some of you draw up and just sing Druber shows, Jimbala Soba Toma Dilatin, Semja Tamji, Sanyokoba Tober shows, if you get Janjusem Samda, and dinner to get a Cheshiada, Cheshiada, and how to give her to Yadi, Undushin, Chigor, what is that? Kulon Janjusemki, down on the Kulon Semke, Gawa to give my Chikishua in that Kulon get on the type. Dusura, Ben and Benazirad, Dochun Junjik. 유야래 도디 지부지게나 부충충지 로시 있음지 유베네 데스마드 말리 마로아 도충지 다디 도디 다가랑 로중이 중이 좀 좋아지게 발렌지 마 유베네 딜레이샤라 다른 유튜브로 와 다디디 도디야 렌제 부 로니슈 숨주 좋아한지게 미 로니슈 숨주지 바 유베네 장루슈 루고로 와 제가 도 유야게 직바 임바데 유hen 미숨디기 슉체숑그 뉴베게 빠베게 타링로 야치주 타링로 루도아 디난시 진비 냠는 제바임베 진비 냠는 직바임바라 아니 꿀롱의 돈에 꿀롱 셈제 탐제기 돈에 삼다반다 야체쇼 데네 코르웨 동안 소소라 타르바토베기 돈에 삼다반 딜레게 충와 다 개와치마 다 소소라 하다 미고반 개와치마 언제 고반 딜레 디기 요나 셈베기 디samsam 당지 지바다는 딜레 충와 다 셈제 다 체델에 삼다지 이 파지 때문에 갈야 수이 지키자기를 삼제 되는 삼다면 디한테 주 때레 다 편연 충쇼듯이 나디 칼라디 가야 삼마다지 유자베나 개와지 메라다 지버지게 임바지라 꿀롱을 통해 유자베나 개와지 메 지난디네 다 전에 판바선보다 개와치마디네 대 삼나베네 꿀롱을 통해 개와치죠 최고 지난디네 장도 개와 강을 두베네 지나다 지금 쇼게 즉 연차를 표베나다 차 표베나다 안지 셈젤이야 옌리아 로바치기나자 군론들이야 셈제 탐 이제 디기 템바 셈제 동안다 저 디장에 셈제 탐지기든 산요고바 토벌쇼 산요고바 토예게 돈달라 양이 한 옌리 판도시에 돈달라 디인 이아섬 푸기에 제기 삼바 삼다베나다 쇠남데 갸치모시 우사고 레제다
From what I've just mentioned in this previous segment, what hopefully will be clear, is that the quality of the motivation determines the amount of merit or virtue accumulated. In particular, when the motivation is sincere and heartfelt, the same act produces an incredible amount of merit than a mere recitation of words or something just done mindlessly. So tonight, as before every teaching session and every formal session of practice, we recite a particular verse. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through practicing generosity and other perfections, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So this is a verse you'll all know well. And the reason we recite it before all formal occasions, and you may well do it at home in your own formal practice, is to set our motivation, and thereby to impact the amount of merit that same practice will accrue. So when we, tonight, for example, recited, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, there we are going for refuge. So we are explicitly reminding ourselves of this Buddhist practice we're engaging in. And it's not only a Buddhist practice, but it's a practice of the Mahayana, because we're going for refuge until I attain enlightenment. But thereafter then, the next two lines, we generate bodhicitta. By the merit I create, so in the case of listening to the teaching, by the merit I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So there, with that part of the recitation, we make it clear. The purpose that I am listening, the purpose behind me listening to this teaching, or it may be the same before your meditation, is so that I can develop qualities within, so that I can become a Buddha in order to help others. And in fact, until I become a Buddha over that period of time, so that I can help others ever more. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing this. And we generate this motivation beforehand, and especially in the teaching event, it's easier. There's a lot of downtime, and then you can remind yourself of your motivation, re-energize it. This makes such a difference to that same activity of engaging in a meditation or receiving a teaching. And to give an easy to understand illustration, if we have a small stone and 3 people throw it, one is a toddler, one is a young teenager, and the third is a fit adult. That same stone will be propelled 3 very different distances because of the power of the act behind it. So this then is likened to the quality of the motivation. The quality of the motivation determines how much merit is accumulated. So for example, if you have a dog or a cat at home and you feed them and it's done, and that's another chore finished for the day, well, it's a good thing to do. But in terms of the kind of goals we've been speaking about, the ways to live a meaningful life, it doesn't come into that. This is just another mindless activity of this life, getting a task done. But if one does it, say, with the motivation of the level of bodhicitta that most of us can generate, we can feed our dear pet. This is an animal we care for very deeply, or a being we care for very deeply. And we can do so as an expression. I know I'm bringing joy to your mind right now, and I know I'm alleviating your suffering. May I be able to alleviate all forms of suffering that you experience. May I guide you eventually to attain your own enlightenment. And not just you. In the same way that I'm bringing joy to you through my actions, may I bring joy to all. In the same way that I'm alleviating you for my actions, may my actions lead to the alleviation of suffering for all. And may I help others in the ways that are coarse and obvious, such as feeding, and may I help them in the subtler ways, such as helping them train their mind, and may I help others eradicate all levels of afflictions and their seeds and even their imprints, and help thereby all beings gain freedom from suffering. And then one plays that little story in one's mind as one feeds the dog or the cat, and they have no idea what you're doing, they're very happy, but you are creating so much more merit. And it's taking no time. You engage in that same activity, but you're generating a decent motivation. And if you did a meditation that morning, it will be easy to do, because you're just reminding yourself of what you meditated on. And you do this again and again during your day, so much merit's created, and rapid spiritual development will come in this life.
언제 저당은 이제 냠는지 삼로도스 땅고리에서 삼로당하지 레고면서 다 삼로도스 땅고리에서 제가 들려가 가르쳐베나 직접 군노되네 삼로다 되네기 제가 제ben에 판도요래서 지나당은 저 삼로 장고리에서 냠는 세대 여러 삼로난 삼로긴 디야 두세 자르제 교화다 다야게 돈달라 냠내세 송고를 제가 되네기 당도 샘교와 다야도 나 송거자 디수치 호레에서지 제가 되네기 저 탑랑로시 되네 송거와 제가 베네가 저게 칼라로시 소소나 칼라시 사기여베네 담보 칼라디야 땡이 디칼라디야 건조스마 상기에다 초주기와 세탄 제불 푸기에 샘비게 당이 푸기에 견주 시로시 사지 삼로된 다베네 디 개와사고 제자 개와사서 진짜 니네게 칼라세도 겁이야. 다 소소게 어디 저거 자야 섬마다체 땡에 수분할래 부신 빠도 매버요. 진짜 디수양자 세해 고고 지상에 칼라디 콘세해 콘솔려 주야 오지체 콘솔려 안지 수부 되오당 콘스치게 저게 기부 쉬어쇼 선배 콘솔리 심젤리 펜비치도 이아 선배 삼다체 세베네 칼랑을 세고래 조강한테 경고할 때 이내 디기 군노 디기다 평에서고래지 지상 개화세디 먼저 칼라세디 군주를 푸기 군주 시로제 대안에 sem전 탐지기도 상조고마 투비 치도 푸기 교시로제 사디 두시네 삼다원이 디개화래다 디에 sem전 탐지기도 삼다원이다 개화디 개침 못하고래 다 칼라스 먼저 세디고블이야 아니 수분나래 심전 장래 대바요 컨트롤 펜도요 치 심전에 펜베치도 이야 삼백에 디던다리 인세 직사야도 아니 한지 컨주 펜베치도 인 삼다이데 안디야 개화차거 제자다 지게 삼다웨나 삼리토네 칼라스 소소 칼라사웨네 개화 아니 지게 두스네 소소 조화자와 내내 제게 개화에 싸봐 니가로 차고를 제가 디네게 삼다이디 아주 이게 침보래 제가 나와 상기 비 냠냠세도 최제세도 삼로 두스네 펜베 삼로 짱짱지 삼다 장기장이 전에 근데 게디나디는 펜베 삼로데 개체체 게디나 펜베 삼로데 샬레 펜베 삼로 야 삼로 야하디 야 슈처처 두고로와 제가 디네 자다 아주 디랭게 쉬야디 된디가 삼다이디 쉬야세데 당아주 디나데 더 쉬야디래 기부 중국의 남지림배 남자사 기부 딩게 남지림배 남자사 기부 침배 남지림배 남자 땅도 다 남릴 마선 차상의 로직 돌두지가 아주 쉬사와 당아주 그 냠는 제당에 삼로 땅탕이 림바디 삼로 땅탕 냠는 제당 삼로 땅탕이 림바디 되네
From the illustration I just gave of feeding your pet, a general point to take from that, whatever you do throughout your day, take care of your mind. You heard me talking about the two friends of the meditator, mindfulness and vigilant introspection. Utilize them throughout your day. This will bring about rapid spiritual development. And if you take care of your mind throughout the day, you'll transform these many ordinary or mundane activities that consume our time. We'll transform those mundane activities into something special, into something remarkable. And this practice will greatly aid in training your mind, because then you're not leaving your Buddhist practice to the temple or the cushion, but you are bringing it into your lived experience, into your daily life. So every day, several times, we enjoy some nice food. Here one is encouraged, before you eat, take a moment, offer it to the three jewels. And in this process of offering, if you know some prayers, you can recite those, but whether you recite a formal prayer or not isn't important. It's what you're doing with your mind. So offer to the three jewels with faith and with thanks. Also, one can recall the great kindness of others, because this is a meal, even if you prepared it for yourself, it still came about in dependence on the kindness of many. Moreover, inside our body, we have beings living. Maybe it's maybe just some unwanted worms. Maybe these cells that we have or the bacteria in our gut. Maybe they have consciousness. But in terms of our mind training, we can think that they maybe do. And when we offer the food, we offer it to the three jewels, but also to sustain the beings abiding within us. And then, moreover, we can also remind ourselves that the primary purpose of this meal is to sustain my body and thereby enable my ongoing spiritual practice, spiritual development. And then we enjoy our meal. But we haven't now merely enjoyed a meal, we've created merit. And when one has made offerings like this, doesn't take very long, and one doesn't even need to do it in a way that's visible to others. Because depending on your situation at home or in a restaurant, one can do it in a way that no one is aware of. The waiter's bringing it over, and you do your offering then, and then you eat with everyone in a way that's not pretentious or not showy. And the purpose of this illustration and the previous one is to encourage you to keep the Dharma present in your mind throughout the day. Not to leave the Dharma as something, as an important part of your life, but separate. Dharma, or Buddhist practice, is training the mind. And our mind is always present and active. So if we keep our mind in accordance with the Dharma, we are creating merit. We are strengthening our habituation to virtuous ways of thinking. And thereby, these virtuous ways of thinking become ingrained, natural to us. We become naturally an ethical person, naturally a generous person, naturally a patient person. This is how we experience the success of our training. But to bring it on, to bring it about, one cannot leave the meditation or the Buddhist practice in a specific time segment. It needs to be integrated into your daily life in this way. And this is how one comes to experience one's life as meaningful, through experiencing the transformation the Dharma brings to your own life.
대중의 최고부야다 안데니 짐바다에게 수남 딜에 때네 안가상 요고번 녜sem제 탐제를 펜바게 제무 주투버 쇼서야다 인게와 딜에 때네 안 점리를 시대 용어 쇼서야다 셈제인 현나 네바디게 자진 안디기데 때마 용어 쇼서비 디니 공어 겹나 디니 님다 봐 차르스물 뉴쇼래 쇼게 쇼서서지 니온 칼라 공다 칼라서지 개호 베는 야호시 숨사도 그래 Then Parapara Jatuada Dine Urwa. She said, Dinig sometime immediate Shana Chemaduna Dine sometime Mudu Nimita Walia and the Kawas are some Yachimoro Satu Yachagotua.
And if you just take these illustrations I've given now of offering food and reflecting the way mentioned when you feed your pets, if you have pets, then you eat at least 3 times a day. And if you offer your tea, then that's a few times more. And if you feed a pet, then that's a few times more. Just that, you're calling the Dharma to mind in a way that you otherwise wouldn't have, having left it just as formal practice. And in this way, you create merit quickly. And what's particularly useful is not merely or only the creation of this merit, but that you are bringing the minds of Dharma into your everyday living. Then it will be easier to bring it into other aspects of your life, keeping your mind on the Dharma in all of your activities, transforming ordinary activities into something remarkable. And then, very finally, dedicate the merit that you accumulate. So here, a skillful way to dedicate is to, at the end of the day, look back on your day and remind yourself of what you did. This is important because it brings about joy in the mind. I offered 3 meals today. I did this and I did that. And you bring joy to your mind, recognizing this. And then you dedicate. May all beings attain peace of mind. May all beings only engage with others in a peaceful, gentle, and loving way. And in this way, through cultivating inner peace, may peace abide within homes, within communities, in the world. May all illnesses subside. May all beings just live in happiness. And then one concludes one's day with a mind that is joyous and peaceful. And that with that in mind, one goes to sleep. Thank you so much. Thank you.